The Mughal Prince and the Pandits of Benares, The Indian Express. Written by Supriya Gandhi, updated, December 5, 2019, 10 hours 41 minutes and 1 second m. Dara Shuko's Upanishad translation was a monumental project with lasting significance for both Hindus and Muslims. Illustration by C.R. Sasikumar. The furore over the appointment of the Sanskrit scholar, Feroz Khan, to a teaching position at the Benares Hindu University has raged on for over 3 weeks. It now looks as though the protesters are winning and that Khan may be appointed at the faculty of Ayurveda instead of teaching literature at the Sanskrit Vidya Dharma Vigyan faculty. The relentless attacks on Khan call to mind a very different era in Benares over 3.5 centuries ago. In early 1657, a group of Brahmin Pandits traveled from Benares to Delhi so that they could join a Muslim prince in his spiritual quest. Prince Dara Shuko had been interested in Indic religious thought for a while, but he had recently discovered a group of sacred texts, the Upanishads, that he felt were perfect expressions of God's oneness. Moreover, he also believed they held the key to understanding the Quran's secrets. He wanted to work with some Sanskrit scholars to decipher and understand them so that he could produce a Persian translation. Dara did not have to go far to find help. For several years, he and his father, the Emperor Shah Jahan, had played host to Kavindracharya Saraswati, a prominent Pandit from Benares. This kind of relationship wasn't unheard of at the time. Shah Jahan's court was only continuing a longer Mughal tradition of hosting Hindu religious scholars. Still, there was something special about Kavindracharya's closeness to the imperial family. Miniature portrait of Dara Shuko. Source: The Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. The court chronicles don't tell us how exactly the prince drew on the Pandit's knowledge, or what Kavindracharya's precise role at the court was. This is what we do know, though. Between the years 1651 and 1657, Shah Jahan lavished Kavindracharya with valuable rewards, on more than a dozen occasions. The Pandit composed verse extolling Shah Jahan's learning. Through his poetry, Kavindracharya also instructed the imperial family in Vedanta and other schools of Indic philosophy. He lauded the emperor's daughter, Jahanara, and her brother, Murad Bakhsh. And, of course, he praised the emperor's eldest son Dara Shuko. The Pandit was held in high esteem by his fellow Brahmin scholars in Benares. So when Dara wished to study the Upanishads, Kavindracharya would have been a natural facilitator. The prince worked for several months with his Pandit interlocutors. He named his Upanishad translation Surai Akbar, or the Greatest Secret. Soon after, Dara was forced to spend the last anguished months of his life as a fugitive from Aurangzeb's men. Once captured, he reportedly tried to defend himself with all he had left, a knife used for sharpening pens. 2 years after he completed the Surai Akbar, his pen was silenced forever. We don't need to glorify Dara Shuko to learn from his story. He was a prince hoping to become a powerful sovereign, not a modern-day social reformer or a democratically elected leader. But the Surai Akbar is only one example among many of how the histories of Sanskrit are closely entwined with Persian and Urdu, and the histories of Hindus with those of Muslims. In fact, the Surai Akbar had an afterlife that Dara could never have imagined. We often hear that Europeans first encountered the Upanishads through their Latin translations. But we have forgotten about the numerous Hindus who also read the Surai Akbar as a way of accessing their own sacred texts. Before the age of print, many educated Hindus read Persian, Kayasths, Khatris and Brahmins among them. Persian had a status somewhat like English does today. Just as some Indians now read English translations of the Gita or the Upanishads, many of their counterparts in the past would have read these works in Persian. Dara's Persian translation opened the Upanishads to non-Brahmins who may not have had the opportunity to develop a mastery of Sanskrit. Take, for instance, the 19th-century reformer Kanhailal Alakdari. He produced an Urdu translation of the Persian Surai Akbar, which enjoyed several printings. Alakdari was not very favorably inclined towards Islam or Muslims, but he felt indebted to Dara Shuko's Surai Akbar, which had helped him access the Upanishads in his own project of Hindu reform and revival. Dara Shukos Upanishad translation was a monumental project with lasting significance for both Hindus and Muslims. But today it has also become a reminder of religious nationalism's impossible logic. Certain luminaries of the ruling dispensation hold seminars on Dara Shuko. They accuse Indian Muslims of admiring Aurangzeb, and ask them to look up to Dara as a model instead. But when a Muslim scholar like Feroz Khan does just that by pursuing a career in Sanskrit studies, he is hounded. Members of the RSS have spoken in favor of Khan's original appointment to the Sanskrit Vidya Dharma Vigyan faculty of BHU. Yet, for now, the forces that their ideology unleashed have prevailed. The future of Sanskrit is linked with the fate of the humanities. It will flourish and grow when the study of all languages and literatures can thrive, in universities that nurture academic freedom and attract a diverse student body. This is a vision too terrifying to behold for the self-styled protectors of tradition. Like other ideological projects, neoliberal Hindutva seeks its own coherence. Yet, in it dwell numerous contradictions. At once it promotes Sanskrit as a pan-Indian ideal for all, but then punishes Muslims for advancing too far in it. It seeks the prestige of science and learning while hollowing out stellar public universities. Such contradictions proceed through a triumphalism that has little space for difference or dissent, let alone our common histories that have Hindus reading Persian, or Muslims studying Sanskrit. Trampling on grassroots, on TN. Local body polls, The Hindu. 3 years after they fell due in 2016, rural local bodies in Tamil Nadu will witness elections in the last week of this month. And, barring any further judicial intervention, urban local bodies are also likely to have elected representatives early next year. It is a travesty of the law that these elections have been delayed. Cities, towns and villages have been under the rule of unelected officials for too long. Under a Supreme Court order, polls for all local bodies will have to be held, except in those districts that have been divided recently to create new ones. It is the first time since local self-government became the third tier of governance under the Constitution that polls have not been held on time in TN. Timely elections were held every 5 years since 1996. Administrative lapses and political litigation over ward delimitation in various local bodies in accordance with the latest population figures in the 2011 census resulted in the unprecedented delay. Originally announced on time in 2016, the notification was cancelled by the Madras High Court citing irregularities in it. Since then, the issue of delimitation, the announcement of new districts and occasional litigation have contributed to the delay in setting in motion elections to the vital tiers of grassroots democracy. There have been frequent changes in the mode of electing mayors of city corporations and chairpersons of municipalities. Originally, direct elections were held, but it was changed to indirect mode in 2006. The present regime has changed its mind twice. In 2016, the Jayalalitha regime opted for indirect elections, that is, only ward councillors would be elected by the people and these representatives, in turn, would elect mayors and municipal chairpersons. The current Edapati K. Palaniswamy government reversed the decision and chose the direct election mode. Recently, it once again changed its mind and restored the system of indirect election, citing better accountability and collective responsibility. It claimed that there was scope for conflict between a directly elected head and the councillors, and that this would be eliminated if councillors themselves elected the mayor or chairperson. Beyond all the legal and technical reasons, and political squabbles over the timing of elections, the attitude of the two main parties towards the importance of local bodies has been quite lukewarm. While the posts of the heads of various local bodies are seen as prestigious, there is much politicization when it comes to devolving funds and letting the various tiers work independently. District panchayats, in particular, are seen as being frequently undermined, as most parties consider them as a redundant third tier among panchayati Raj institutions. While the polls are fought bitterly, the state is still some distance away from including local self-government bodies as partners in its development. Shooting in Pensacola, on Saudi aviation students' crime, The Hindu. The deadly shooting at Florida's Pensacola Naval Air Station by a Saudi aviation student that killed 3 and injured 8 others is a fresh challenge to the Saudi authorities, who are trying to remake the kingdom's image after a series of recent setbacks. U.S. federal investigators say they are yet to establish the gunman's motive, but some lawmakers have already claimed it was an act of terror. The suspect, Mohammed al-Shamrani, 21, who had been training in the U.S. for 2 years, had watched mass shooting videos a week before Friday's assault, say investigators. A Twitter handle that is believed to have belonged to him called the U.S. a nation of evil, and blamed it for crimes not only against Muslims but also humanity. This is not the first time a Saudi national is attacking Americans inside the U.S. 15 of the 19 al-Qaeda-linked terrorists behind the September 11, 2001 attacks were Saudi citizens. But U.S.-Saudi relations have deepened over the years despite the 9/11 attacks. U.S. President Donald Trump, in his quest to contain Iran, Saudi Arabia's main regional rival, has doubled down on America's ties with the kingdom. But his push for stronger ties with the Saudis had faced severe resistance from U.S. lawmakers. The murder of Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018, suppression of dissent at home by the Saudi authorities, and the ongoing Saudi-led war on Yemen have all brought renewed global focus on the character of the Saudi leadership. Riyadh was quick in condemning the barbaric Pensacola shooting, saying the shooter did not represent the Saudi people. The incident is unlikely to upset the U.S.-Saudi military ties immediately, as both countries need each other in the larger geopolitical setting. 2,000 more American troops could be sent to the kingdom to take on Iran. But the incident could strengthen the perception, especially among U.S. lawmakers, that the conservative kingdom is not doing enough to flush out extremism, given that the attacker was a second lieutenant in the Royal Saudi Air Force. It also raises questions about the vetting standards of both countries. More important, it is America's lax gun rules that allowed the shooter to buy the Glock 45 9mm handgun which he used for the attack. Initial reports suggested that he used a loophole in the gun laws to buy the weapon legally. Despite repeated incidents of gun violence, most by Americans against Americans, the U.S. federal government could do little in addressing the problem. Worse, Mr. Trump and his Republican Party are opposed to stringent gun control rules. The U.S. has to first review its lax gun rules and then address issues such as vetting standards, foreign military ties, and radicalism in general if it wants to prevent such incidents. Demonizing the legal system won't help, the Hindu. Some of the existing laws are already too harsh and some other provisions are not being implemented. The killing of the 4 men accused of the rape and murder of the Hyderabad veterinarian will need to be properly investigated, though the Telangana police's conduct thus far does not inspire confidence. Ever since the police first turned away the victim's family when they went to lodge a complaint, they demonstrated no commitment to the rule of law. Finally, they claimed that the accused, who were under heavy police protection, tried to escape and had to be killed. The atmosphere of lawlessness that was built up prior to the shooting certainly did not help. From protesters on the ground, to the commentary on social media, to MPs in Parliament, the demand for the instant killing of the accused from all corners created the public opinion for the abandonment of the rule of law that appears to have led to the incident. The argument made by people is that the rule of law is not giving women justice, and that at the very least, laws need to be amended to create a stronger deterrent and provide quicker closure to victims of crimes of sexual violence. Flawed arguments. Both arguments are flawed and need to be challenged, or, once again, hard cases will lead to bad law. The charge-sheeting rates in cases of rape as well as rape and murder are higher than that for all other violent crimes, and the conviction rates are higher too, while the pendency rates are roughly the same as the average for all violent crimes. The court pendency rate for crimes against scheduled castes, SCs, on the other hand, is far higher, but you will not see mass public support for killing those accused of atrocities, including caste-motivated rape against Dalits. Even among those rare few who have professed some belief in the rule of law in the last week, the argument has been that laws need to get tougher. The hard truth, after an examination of legal reform recommendations and available judicial data, is this: there is no new law needed. In fact, some of the existing legal provisions are too harsh in ways that harm both men and women, and other important legal provisions are not being implemented. The most comprehensive review of the gaps in laws around sexual harassment and sexual violence came in the aftermath of the 2012 Delhi rape incident in the form of the Justice Verma Committee report and its recommendations. It is worth noting that the report's recommendations began by acknowledging that existing laws were adequate, but some improvements could be made. The report's key recommendations were centered at improving the status of women in non-legal ways as well, but its legal recommendations included a much-needed broadening of the definition of rape. The report also recommended raising the minimum sentence for rape to 10 years. Strengthening the law. The 2013 Criminal Law Amendment Act, which sought to operationalize some of these suggestions, went well beyond what was recommended by the Verma Committee report. It introduced the death penalty for some circumstances around rape, including repeat offenses, despite the Verma Committee expressly arguing against this. Subsequent laws have raised mandatory minimum sentences and simultaneously raised the age of consent. These changes have had a few worrisome results. 1. There has been further criminalization, with longer sentences, of consenting underage couples, which my investigation for the Hindu in 2014 in Delhi found was very common. 2. Laws have removed any discretion in minimum sentencing from the hands of judges. There is evidence from other fields of law that removing such discretion actually lowers the rate of conviction. 2 of the largest categories of rape cases I found pertain to consenting couples criminalized by the woman's family, over 40% of the cases in Delhi, and breach of promise to marry, over 25%. Further, conviction in cases other than those involving these two categories was over 75%. What we have now is a situation where there are not any remaining loopholes in laws concerning sexual violence against women. On the other hand, there is no legal protection for adult men from rape, and under the new Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act, the sexual abuse of a transgender person carries a maximum sentence of 2 years only. Official statistics on the speed of trials by nature of crime are not maintained. However, there is anecdotal evidence among practicing lawyers that the average rape trial in a big city at the trial court stage is now completed within 2 years, but the appellate process takes longer. In the 2012 Delhi case, the trial was conducted within a year, the High Court appeal by March 2014, and the Supreme Court appeal by May 2017. Subsequently, the appeals of the convicts against their sentence, the death penalty, were heard and rejected. When the accused is powerful. There remain instances, particularly when the accused is a powerful person, where the process of exhausting the individual's pre-trial options, including attempts to quash charges or shift the trial to a friendlier city, makes a mockery of a fast-track case. The trial of former Tehelka editor Tarun Tejpal, accused of sexually assaulting an employee, only resumed in October 2019 as Tejpal went up to the Supreme Court seeking quashing of the charges filed in 2013. The argument here is not that the accused should not receive the full range of pre-trial legal options guaranteed by law, but that they be heard at a pace that maintains the spirit of providing speedy justice to the complainants. Other improvements in existing laws remain essential. The police are still able to ask worried parents to return home without filing an FIR, already a punishable act for the police. Victims still face cross-examination about their past sexual histories, and there is still little by way of rehabilitation or even therapy offered to victims. Legal arguments are easy to make from a distance, when one is not suffering the agony of a family that has had to imagine the final, helpless hours of a loved one. There is no doubt that the anguish or the outrage of people in the aftermath of such horrific crimes is justified and, for the most part, well-intentioned. However, hard cases have already made bad law in India, and we continue to flail in helplessness for more laws. The tragedy is there is no band-aid left. Instead, by abandoning principles of justice to calm the rage, we are making the country more savage and less safe for women. Rukmini S. is a Chennai-based data journalist. Small and inclusive, The Indian Express. By Editorial, updated, December 9, 2019, 1 hour 23 minutes and 11 seconds am. The new approach to granting differentiated licenses to small finance banks and payment banks is welcome, especially given the current context. India's central bank has often been criticized for being too conservative when it comes to lifting the entry barriers for new players in the banking sector. 3 years after the RBI approved licenses to 10 small finance banks, the regulator has now issued the final guidelines for licensing such banks throughout the year or on tap, encouraged presumably by the performance of some of these entities. The bar has been raised for new entrants in terms of higher capital requirements, 200 crore rupees now from 100 crore rupees earlier, besides stiffer prudential norms on a continuing basis and a mandatory requirement to list after 3 years when the net worth tops 500 crore rupees. The new approach to granting differentiated licenses to small finance banks and payment banks is welcome, especially given the current context where the established full-service large banks are scaling back their franchises to reduce expenditure and in light of the collateral impact of the planned mergers of some of the state-owned banks. Small finance banks have the potential to provide an alternative to some of the existing institutions with their mandated focus on small and medium businesses, the informal sector, small and marginal farmers, and thus on increasing financial inclusion and serving a variety of unserved clients in the hinterland and Tier 3 and 4 cities and towns. The RBI itself has said that a review of the performance of small finance banks shows that they have achieved their priority sector targets and attained the mandate for furthering financial inclusion, building a strong case for the entry of more players. Early reports, too, indicate that though these banks account for less than 0.5% of total deposits and less than 1% of total advances, many of them have been growing their loan book at a good clip. But where these new institutions, quite a few of which are former MFIs, are going to be tested is not just in building a brand franchise but also in ensuring relatively low-cost operations by diversifying their loan portfolios and lowering the old legacy loan stock and wholesale deposits, which can be costly, and putting in place robust technology platforms and modern risk management systems. The experience of the last 2 decades has shown that a competitive banking system can help foster a more inclusive financial sector. Small finance banks could well occupy the space being gradually vacated by some of the bigger banks and complement them too in segments such as micro and small businesses and the informal sector. Their success will, however, be contingent on asset quality, the trust they are able to build progressively, the level and standards of governance and regulatory oversight. For all the latest opinion news, download Indian Express app. Tags: Reserve Bank India. 0 comments asterisk. Don't cry for onions, the Indian Express. By Editorial, updated, December 9, 2019, 1 hour 28 minutes and 25 seconds am. The Modi government should focus on problems that shall not pass as easily as onions. Onions continue to burn consumer pockets, notwithstanding several firefighting measures deployed by the Narendra Modi government. Since September end, exports, annually worth almost $500 million, have been banned, stock limits imposed on the trade, wholesalers cannot keep more than 25 tons and retailers 5 tons, the state-owned MMTC Limited ordered to import 1 lakh tons, LT, and the requirement of fumigation against pest and disease at the country of exports relaxed. If all these actions, the Income Tax Department is even conducting nationwide raids on traders to probe any holding of unaccounted stocks, haven't stopped retail onion prices from doubling to 100 rupees per kilogram levels in the last 2 months, the primary culprit is clearly not hoarding, but production. Kharif onion sowings were, this time, affected by deficient monsoon rainfall till late July. Even the crop that was planted suffered damage from excess rains, especially after September and extending to November. As a result, the total Kharif and late Kharif onion output is officially down nearly 18 LT or 26%. The actual decline could be more. But it isn't just onions. This year's unusual combination of early season drought and prolonged unseasonal rains around the time of harvesting has taken a toll on most Kharif crops. Pulses, soybean and maize, among others, are trading significantly higher than last year. Dairies, too, are procuring less, even as the cost of milk has gone up. While some of that is due to a slow start to the flush season, animals generally produce more after October, which again has been disrupted by an extended monsoon. There might be structural reasons as well. Low milk realizations of the past 3 to 4 years have forced many farmers to reduce herd sizes and underfeed their cattle, particularly calves and pregnant, non-lactating females. Its effects are showing now, with skimmed milk powder rates crossing 300 rupees per kilogram, from Rs 140 to 150 a year ago. Simply put, the period of low consumer food inflation, an average of 1.38% year-on-year from September 2016 to August 2019, unprecedented in India, is over. That, however, isn't necessarily bad news. Ultra-low inflation isn't sustainable or even in consumer interest, if it disincentivizes producers. The current price increases, after discounting for weather aberrations or factors specific to onion, are more of a correction. Price recovery, combined with the best monsoon rains in 25 years that have filled up all major reservoirs and substantially recharged groundwater tables, will spur ongoing rabi plantings. That would, in all likelihood, yield a bumper harvest and more than compensate for any kharif shortfalls. There can be nothing better for the economy today than rural incomes bouncing back. And there can be nothing worse than knee-jerk policy reactions to temporary shortage-induced price spikes. The Modi government should focus on problems that shall not pass as easily as onions. For all the latest opinion news, download Indian Express app. 0 comments *. JNU is targeted because it's one-of-a-kind postgraduate university, the Indian Express. Written by Subhashis Banerjee, updated, December 9, 2019, 10 hours 1 minute and 53 seconds am. It is well understood that the burden of high loans limits the choices of graduating students, and narrows the spaces for their intellectual explorations. File. Recently, the extent of subsidies in publicly funded universities has received quite a bit of attention. Not only did JNU propose to roughly double the fees for its PhD and master's students, but even the IIT Council, while doing away with the stipend scheme, has tentatively decided to increase the M.Tech fees by nearly 10 times. While the IIT step is ostensibly motivated towards deterring unviable legacy master's programs of little interest to the industry and move towards more attractive industry-sponsored programs, understanding the provocations at JNU has not been easy. It is well understood that the burden of high loans limits the choices of graduating students, and narrows the spaces for their intellectual explorations. This, in turn, hurts the society. Postgraduate research is usually fully supported everywhere in the world. Boarding and lodging charges are either directly subsidized, or are factored into the stipend or assistantship. At a stipend of 8,000 rupees per month, which most of the postgraduate scholars at JNU receive, the proposed increases are bound to pinch. Postgraduate research, especially PhD research, cannot be self-financed anywhere because that will necessitate subsequent remuneration with high salaries, forcing research to be entirely market-driven and killing the spirit of free enquiry. Parents supporting postgraduate studies is also a bad idea. One needs independence at that age for any kind of free thinking to be possible. Postgraduate research must be supported by research grants, whenever feasible, either from public or private sources, as is common in the sciences, engineering, economics or finance. However, it is hard to envisage industry funding research in areas not directly of interest to them, for example, in philosophy, particle physics, topology or geometry, or even in climate change, pollution, poverty mapping, history, gender studies or socio-economic understanding of public health, except as philanthropy in a limited way. Developing understanding in topics such as these is crucial for society and humanity, and it is therefore essential to internally support them to the extent possible by publicly funded universities. This is where JNU plays a crucial role, especially in the areas of social and political sciences. It is a one-of-a-kind postgraduate university in the country that has promoted interdisciplinary research and a vibrant culture of free inquiry, where learning outside the classroom has been as important as inside, and where it has been possible to challenge every doctrine and discuss it democratically. Moreover, JNU has set exemplary standards for an inclusive admission policy that extends beyond the mandatory reservations to affirmative action for gender and other marginalized categories, including for backward regions. The resulting diversity is enriching and must be celebrated rather than attacked. Students from JNU have not only moved to conventional careers in the civil services, armed forces, academics and in journalism, but some have also opted for active politics and other forms of activism. JNU can boast of producing a significant number of educated politicians, and there are at least 2 even in the current Central Cabinet of Ministers. There can be no doubt that there is scope for improvement, including in research, but the same can be said about most other things. It certainly is not the case that JNU is the most broken thing in the country that requires urgent and violent fixing. Fees and stipends require periodic adjustments in any university. But the sudden raising of fees without adequate consultations, and the continual unduly combative posture of the administration is more indicative of waging a war on what JNU represents, rather than nurturing and shaping it with sagacious insight. The unusual belligerence may have something to do with the unfortunate taxpayers' perception of JNU as a den of useless sociologists, leftists, and even anti-nationals. Such simplistic and illogical calumny is all the more reason for supporting more such publicly funded centers of liberal education and research. In contrast, the IITs have turned to seek their relevance from university rankings rather than from original impactful contributions in engineering, sciences, public policy and education. Projecting wonderfully multidimensional entities like universities onto straight lines to enforce linear ordering is conceptually flawed, and is a fundamentally mistaken way of seeking excellence that leads to faulty reward models and biodata engineering. The IIT system has produced some top-class academics, researchers and students, and they have indeed made sporadic outstanding contributions of both fundamental and applied nature. However, sustained high-quality response, either to fundamental questions, or to societal imperatives such as climate change, public health, clean water, pollution, digitization and society, have, at best, been muted. This is mainly because of faulty metrics and failure to define collective priorities and action groups. While industry-sponsored research in public universities is crucial, not all research in higher education can be market-driven. Publicly funded universities also have the responsibility to train people to ask fundamental questions not of immediate interest to the industry, but to identify and conduct independent inquiry of societal problems, provide directions, and, if required, raise voices of dissent if policies go awry. Public funding of higher education is thus crucial for any society. And, ultimately, education needs to be free and equitable for all, even if not subsidized. Of course, the requirements of higher education need to be balanced against the even more fundamental demands of primary and general college education for all. This is where prioritization and policy making becomes crucial, and the strategic response and guidance from our academic leadership, both in our universities and in our policy-making bodies, need to become more thoughtful. And the education budget, still amongst the lowest in the world, as a percentage of the GDP, needs to go up significantly. This article first appeared in the print edition on December 9, 2019 under the title, What JNU Represents. The writer is associated with the Computer Science and Engineering Department in the School of Public Policy, IIT Delhi. For all the latest opinion news, download Indian Express app. More from Subhashis Banerjee. A more opaque Aadhaar. Its technical design requires serious reconsideration, following amendments to the law. The best way to vote. Unequal, unsecular, on Citizenship Amendment Bill, the Hindu. The Citizenship Amendment Bill, 2019, CAB, is brazenly discriminatory, and it is only a matter of time before its constitutionality is subjected to severe judicial scrutiny. The government's obstinacy in going ahead with it, despite opposition in Parliament, as well as from enlightened sections, is unfortunate. In both its intent and wording, the proposed amendment singles out a community for hostile treatment. In short, the bill chooses to open its citizenship door to non-Muslims from three nations with a Muslim majority: Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan. The ostensible reason: an opportunity to members of minority communities from these countries who had entered India prior to December 31, 2014, to apply for citizenship through naturalization. The residential requirement for this category for naturalization is reduced from 11 years to 5. The bill carefully avoids the words persecuted minorities, but the statement of objects and reasons says, many persons belonging to Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi and Christian communities have faced persecution on grounds of religions, in these three countries. Further, it refers to Home Ministry notifications in 2015-2016 through which it had exempted these undocumented migrants from the adverse penal consequences under the Passport, Entry into India, Act, 1920, and the Foreigners Act, 1946. The CAB creates a category of people on the basis of their religion and renders them eligible for its beneficial effects. A key argument against the CAB is that it will not extend to those persecuted in Myanmar and Sri Lanka, from where Rohingya Muslims and Tamils are staying in the country as refugees. Further, it fails to allow Shia and Ahmadiyya Muslims, who also face persecution, to apply for citizenship. The exemption from the application of the CAB's provisions in tribal areas in Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram and Tripura, and the inner line permit areas in Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland and Mizoram, with Manipur to be added soon, is clearly based on political expediency, even if it is in line with the constitutional guarantees given to indigenous populations and statutory protection given to ILP areas. It demonstrates the need for careful and meaningful categorization, something that the main provisions fail to do. The central feature of the equal protection of the law envisaged in Article 14 is that the basis for classifying a group for a particular kind of treatment should bear a rational nexus with the overall objective. If protecting persecuted neighborhood minorities is the objective, the classification may fail the test of constitutionality because of the exclusion of some countries and communities using religion. It would be a sad day for the Republic if legislation that challenges its founding principles of equality and secularism is allowed to be passed. Lethal misgovernance. On Anuj Mandi fire tragedy, The Hindu. The deadly fire at dawn on Sunday that swept through an unregistered bag factory in Delhi's Anuj Mandi area, killing 43 workers, is a shocking reminder that for every big industrial unit showcased as evidence of an emerging power, there are scores of Dickensian rathholes in which workers toil under crushing, dangerous conditions. Neither the Delhi government nor the centre, which has control of law and order in the national capital, can pretend to be surprised at the many casualties. It is well known that poorly paid laborers live and work in several residential buildings turned into unregistered factories, and those who died due to suffocation or burn injuries were no different. Most of them came from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and virtually slept at night next to the machines they worked on. If it is confirmed by a probe that the victims were locked in and obstructed by materials stacked on staircases, the culpability of those responsible would be enormously higher. A small consolation is the rescue of several people given the narrow approach to the stricken building, and a mass of tangled wires. The building's owner and the manager have been arrested to mollify public anger, but administrative agencies cannot escape responsibility for allowing the factory and other such units to function illegally, without safety audits. The third deadliest building fire in the national capital in 2 decades, on December 8, ahead of the polls to the Delhi Assembly, will provide grist to the opposition to pin the blame on the AAP government, which is responsible for civic services and labor issues. Delhi's Chief Minister, Arvind Kejriwal has, on the other hand, been blaming the lack of complete authority and obstruction by the centre for his party not being able to deliver on a broader development agenda. Public safety cannot be allowed to fall victim to this irresponsible wrangling. Political parties, civil society and government must chart a new course, with a plan to make the older, built-up areas safe. At the root of chaotic urban development is the deplorable compact arrived at between governments and violators that allows rezoning to accommodate illegal commercial establishments in residential zones, weak enforcement of regulations and post facto regularization of illegalities. The Supreme Court of India has come down on municipal authorities in Delhi in the past for this, although culpability of building owners, as in the Upar Cinema case, has not been dealt with sternly. Initial financial relief has been announced for the victims in the Anuj Mandi fire, and some people will face the law, but the real test lies in whether this is treated as a watershed. Rules under the new Occupational Safety Code must be strong enough to protect workers. Less government and lax enforcement is bad policy. It costs lives and harms the economy. A growing blot on the criminal justice system, The Hindu. While there is reason to be concerned about delays in rape trials, a Hyderabad-like solution is out of the question. The Indian criminal justice system increasingly reflects the idea of power, rather than justice. Since the promise of criminal law as an instrument of safety is matched only by its power to destroy, guarantees of due process were accordingly incorporated in the criminal procedure so that every accused person gets a fair trial. Winston Churchill said, "The mood and temper of the public in regard to the treatment of crime and criminals is one of the most unfailing tests of the civilization of any country." We, in India, continue to follow a culture of control, and a tendency to govern through crime. There are instances where the police, of late, have become the judge and the media, especially electronic, has started behaving like a court. A disturbing norm. The deaths, in an encounter last Friday, of the 4 accused in the rape and murder of a young veterinarian in Hyderabad, it happened on Wednesday, has revived the debate on the right to kill, or extrajudicial killings, or fake encounters, which is the ugly reality of our country. Earlier, these encounters used to be criticized by the public and media. But in the new and resurgent India, we have started celebrating this instant and brutal form of justice. Bloodlust has become the norm in preference to due process and constitutional norms. For example, there were many in Hyderabad who were seen showering flower petals on the police officers involved in Friday's encounter. Even the father of the Unnao rape victim has demanded Hyderabad-like justice. Is India moving from rule of law to rule by gun? We have reason to be concerned about delays in rape trials. But a Hyderabad-like solution is absolutely out of the question. The new Chief Justice of India has rightly ruled out the instant justice model in a speech recently. The right thing to do in rape cases is to appoint senior judges in fast-track courts, no adjournments should be permitted, and rape courts should be put under the direct control of high courts, the district judge should not have any power to interfere, and the trial must be completed within 3 months. The only consolation is that India is not the only country that uses encounters. A UN working group on enforced or involuntary disappearances has noted, with anguish, that guilty officials are generally not punished. India is also bound by Resolution 1989 65 of May 24, 1989, which had recommended that the principles on the effective prevention and investigation of extralegal, arbitrary and summary executions, annexed to the resolution, be honored by all governments. The UN General Assembly subsequently approved the principles. It resolved that the principles shall be taken into account and respected by governments within the framework of their national legislation and practices, and shall be brought to the attention of law enforcement and criminal justice officials, military personnel, lawyers, members of the executive and legislative bodies of the government and the public in general. We have not done much in disseminating these guidelines and norms among our police and security forces. Trigger-happy police. In the absence of a proper knowledge of international norms, police in India continue to protest against human rights standards in dealing with criminals. Some years ago, in Extrajudicial Execution Victim Families Association, the Supreme Court of India was dealing with more than 1,500 cases of such killings in Manipur. Justice Maiden B. Lokor said, "Scrutiny by the courts in such cases leads to complaints by the state of its having to fight militants, insurgents and terrorists with one hand tied behind its back. This is not a valid criticism since, and this is important, in such cases it is not the encounter or the operation that is under scrutiny but the smoking gun that is under scrutiny. There is a qualitative difference between use of force in an operation and use of such deadly force that is akin to using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. One is an act of self-defense while the other is an act of retaliation. The Hyderabad encounter does not look like an act of self-defense. It defies common sense and stretches credulity that the police would take accused to the scene of crime at 5:30 a.m. The sun rises a little after 6 a.m. The confession of rape by them to the police is irrelevant under Section 25 in the Indian Evidence Act, 1872. Moreover, our law does permit retraction of confessions by the accused. The UN Human Rights Committee, in many reports, has said that encounters are murders. Encounter killings are probably the greatest violation of the most precious of all fundamental rights, the right to live with human dignity. Many a time these killings are fake and are so orchestrated that it is difficult to conclusively prove them wrong. These killings always take place with the prior consent of the highest authority, be it either administrative or ministerial. Encounters have indeed become the common phenomenon of our criminal justice system, and there are police officers who covet the title, encounter specialists. Our legal system does not permit police officers to kill an accused merely because he is a dreaded criminal, rapist or terrorist. Undoubtedly, the police have to arrest the accused and make them face trial. The Supreme Court has repeatedly admonished trigger-happy police personnel who liquidate criminals and project the incident as an encounter. The court observed in Om Prakash Anors v. State of Jharkhand and ANR on September 26, 2012, such killings must be deprecated. They are not recognized as legal by our criminal justice administration system. They amount to state terrorism. The Punjab Model. During the Punjab insurgency in the 1980s, a large number of suspected militants were eliminated through the encounter killings. The DGP of the state, the late KPS. Gill, even got the governor of the state transferred on questioning the police. Gill contemptuously termed those who tried to get justice in encounter matters as litigation guns. The police tried its best to silence those who wanted due process, such as Jaswant Singh Kalra, an activist, who used government crematoria records of just one Punjab district to show that at least 6,000 people were secretly cremated by the police. The government of India itself admitted that as many as 2,097 people had been secretly cremated in Amritsar alone, in spite of the intervention of the National Human Rights Commission (NHRC) and the Supreme Court. Just 30 cases were registered by the Central Bureau of Investigation. Punjab's response to terrorism was appreciated all over as a model to be followed by other states. Similarly, in Kashmir about 8,000 people who were apparently in police custody were eliminated in a similar manner, though the government contests this figure and says some may have even crossed the border. Even after the so-called end of insurgency, encounters have not come to an end. In 2000, for the massacre of 36 Sikhs in Chittisangpura, 5 suspected militants were killed in an encounter. Subsequent forensic tests showed them to be innocent local villagers. NHRC data show that of the almost 2,500 killings in 1993, half turned out to be fake. There were at least 440 cases of encounters between 2002 to 2008. From 2009 to 2013, another 550 cases in different states were documented. In Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh too has been notorious as far as encounter killings are concerned. In February 2009, in its judgment on a writ petition filed by the Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberties Committee in the context of 1,800 encounter deaths, 1997-2007, the Andhra Pradesh High Court of United Andhra Pradesh recognized that encounter deaths are, prima facie, cases of culpable homicide. Thus, in all cases of encounter deaths, a first information report must be registered, and an independent and impartial investigation ensured. The state's plea of self-defense has to be established at the stage of trial, and not during the stage of investigation. The Supreme Court gave an ex parte stay on the judgment. The High Court in Hyderabad has shown its displeasure over this killing and will hear the matter on Thursday. It has ordered that the bodies of the Hyderabad encounter be preserved till it hears the matter. One hopes the top court of the land will now find the time to finally hear this important matter and uphold this progressive High Court judgment. Faizan Mustafa is Vice-Chancellor, NALSAR University of Law, Hyderabad. The views expressed are personal. Climate treaty at a tipping point, The Hindu. Alternative strategies led by India and China should now move center stage. The annual climate summit, with increasing levels of concentration of greenhouse gases, raises questions on global climate policy. The world's major emitter has rejected multilateralism, premised on burden sharing. The European Union's ambition of net zero emissions by 2050 obfuscates needed societal change by ignoring the embedded carbon in imports, a third of their emissions of carbon dioxide. Both are shifting the burden to India and China. The policy problem is that the climate treaty considers symptoms, emissions of greenhouse gases, rather than the causes, use of natural resources. India, which is responsible for just 3% of cumulative emissions, is the most carbon-efficient and sustainable major economy. Divergent resource use. Excessive resource use by a fifth of the world population in a small part of the planet in the West is still responsible for half of global material use and the cause of climate change. Asia, with half the world's population, is responsible for less than half of material use, and living in harmony with nature. 3 shifts in natural resource use have taken place in the last 400 years, from agriculture to industry, rural to urban, and livelihood to well-being. Colonialism and its aftermath of multinational corporations was the driver of the first shift, infrastructure of the second, and societal notions of progress of the third. Only the first 2 global trends show limited convergence and stabilization. The third diverges sharply between material abundance in the West and societal well-being in India and China. Consumption patterns of primary material use for the provision of major services are driven by diverse values that include both global trends transforming human societies, for example, urbanization, economic globalization and digitization, as well as national pathways to achieve prosperity. At the national level, resource use is primarily construction material and energy use in buildings, mobility and manufacturing, as well as food, which together lead to human well-being. More than half of natural resource use and global emissions occurred after 1950, driven by the gradual shift of 3/4 of the global population to cities. National natural resource use accelerated in 2 distinct phases with very different origins and impacts. In North America and Europe, resource use accelerated after 1950, not with industrial resource use from 1850. By 1970, 3/4 of their population had moved to cities, characterized as unprecedented prosperity, leading to the trajectory towards climate change. China's acceleration of natural resource use from 2000, also driven by urbanization, is characterized as unprecedented growth. Different values and the objective of increasing well-being, rather than wealth, led to China, in 2016, having the same per capita emissions of carbon dioxide as the West had in 1885. The shares of material use of the different activities in cities in China have remained constant since 1995 as increase in wealth does not modify the structural, economic and social changes, energy and material uses in civilizational states. Clearly, there will be no convergence in global material use as values, along with digital service economies in cities, will continue to shape the future. The pathway adopted by China can now be compared and contrasted with the West, as it has come up to that level of urbanization and well-being. The contribution of the United States to resource use, our cumulative emissions of carbon dioxide, peaked at 40% in 1950, with rapid infrastructure development in Europe, declined to 26% and is likely to remain at this level, reflecting its direction and intensity. By 2015, global population had doubled when emissions in China began to stabilize and accounted for 12% of total cumulative emissions. Asia and Africa will peak at per capita levels that are a third of those of the West. Different views of prosperity. India and China, civilizational states with a population nearly 8 times that of the US, have redefined progress. In China, electricity consumption per capita is a third of the European Union (EU) and a sixth of the US. Residential energy consumption has increased at a rate less than half the increase in GDP, and corresponds to the increase in urban population, showing limited increase with more disposable household income. China also has less than a sixth of the number of cars with respect to population than the EU, while the US has nearly 2 times that number. In China, nearly 40% of the distance traveled is by public transport, which is 2 times that of the EU. While the number of cars in China is projected to double by 2040, half the new cars are expected to be electric vehicles. China has the world's most extensive electric high-speed rail system. In Beijing, 3/4 of public transport buses are already electric. Asian household savings as a percent of GDP are 2 times that of the US. Measures for global sustainability should draw lessons from India and China. For example, transport emissions are the fastest growing emissions worldwide, projected to become half of global emissions, and in the future more polluting than coal use. India and China are global leaders in sustainability not only because of their low per capita resource use but also because of their contribution to peak oil around 2035 as they adopt electric vehicles supported by solar and wind renewable energy. By then, India and China are expected to have half the global renewable capacity in electric vehicles. By 2040, more than half of global wealth is again going to be in Asia. The low-carbon social development model adopted by India and China will become the world system, ensuring global sustainability. Then the pattern of natural resource use adopted by Western civilization will more clearly be seen as a short-term anomaly rather than collective transformation or unified evolution of civilization. Much before that, alternative strategies led by India and China should replace the ineffective climate treaty. Mukul Sanwal is a former UN diplomat in the Climate Secretariat. The Age of E.K. Krishna Menon, The Hindu. A biography of Nehru's envoy also serves as a history lesson on politics, diplomacy, Kashmir and China. To introduce one of India's most compelling, consequential and controversial political personalities, Jairam Ramesh collects all the names attributed to V.K. Krishna Menon through the years: Rasputin, Mephistopheles, Lucifer, Svengali, evil genius, the world's most hated diplomat. And other colorful images. In his new book, A Checkered Brilliance, Ramesh writes that it was Menon's avatar as Jawaharlal Nehru's soulmate, sounding board and envoy between 1935 and 1964 that earned him a permanent place in India's 20th century history. Menon also holds the record for having made the longest speech at the United Nations in 1957, defending India's position on Kashmir. But, as Ramesh writes, Menon continues to be held chiefly responsible for India's debacle in the war with China in 1962 and was forced to resign as defense minister that November. An excerpt. The 1962 election in the Bombay constituency drew national and international attention. It was, of course, a Krishna Menon versus J.B. Kripalani contest, a contest between a congressman and an ex-congressman. But more fundamentally, Jawaharlal Nehru was the issue, and he, like in 1957, did not hesitate to make himself that. On the 23rd of February 1962, he issued an appeal but not as elaborate and elongated as the one from 5 years earlier. I trust that the voters of North Bombay will vote for the Congress candidate, Shri V.K. Krishna Menon. Unfortunately, this election has been conducted largely on personal issues. The issues at stake are those of the Congress policy and program. Every congressman, and indeed others also, should vote therefore on these policies and programs, and not be confused by personal questions. Shri Krishna Menon is a Congress candidate and stands for those policies and programs and, therefore, all those who believe in those policies should vote for him. Nehru was the only big name of Indian politics batting for Krishna Menon. 2 other heavyweights had come out openly against him. On the 8th of February 1962, C. Rajagopalachari had said, if Mr. Menon succeeds, it would be 1 point to Indian communists and 2 points to world communists. A day later Jayaprakash Narayan said, even though Sri Krishna Menon happens to be a Congress candidate, and has the Prime Minister's support, his victory would in effect be a victory of the Communist Party. Kripalani dramatically announced on 12 February 1962 that he would withdraw from the contest if Krishna Menon openly condemned the Communist Party and declared that he was not a communist. A possible successor to Nehru. The result was not a surprise when it was announced on 1 March 1962. Krishna Menon had triumphed comfortably, more than tripling his margin of victory 5 years earlier. After his victory over Kripalani, Krishna Menon was now on top of the world. He had won handsomely. He was now a two-term Lok Sabha MP. He was seen as a possible successor to Nehru, in some polls, third in national popularity after Nehru and Jayaprakash Narayan. To be sure, he derived much of his halo from his proximity to Nehru, but his independent standing in the domestic political arena could not be denied. He returned as defense minister. In May and June 1962, Krishna Menon was back in the UN, making four thundering speeches on Kashmir, which won him further plaudits at home. That he had taken on Muhammad Zafrullah Khan, the foreign minister of Pakistan who had got the better of Gopalaswamy Iyengar in 1948, added to his luster. Attack on India. On 15 July 1962, Krishna Menon wrote to Nehru that he was planning to leave for Geneva. The Prime Minister replied the next day, "I suppose you have to go to Geneva for the Laos conference, although the Ladakh situation would indicate you're staying on here. I see that the Chinese foreign minister is also going to Geneva, the sooner you come back the better." Krishna Menon met with the Chinese foreign minister in Geneva on 22 and 23 July 1962. They had met the previous year in May in Geneva during a similar conference. The two were now attending a 14-nation conference on Laos. A peace agreement was to be finally signed, bringing to an end Krishna Menon's own unflagging efforts that had begun 8 years earlier in this very city. The Hindu used an AP dispatch on its front page on 25 July 1962, Mr. K. Krishna Menon, India's defense minister, who this morning had breakfast talks with Marshal Chen Yi, Chinese foreign minister, later in the evening said, "These disputed areas in Ladakh are largely unoccupied areas. They have posts and we have posts. Sometimes they say we shoot first, sometimes we say they shoot first, actually they shot first." Answering reporters' questions, he rejected a suggestion for a wire barrier along the disputed border. "We are sensible people, we do not put up wire fences," he said. Marshal Chen Yi said tonight he considered the border dispute with India as a localized problem which would not lead to war. Krishna Menon came back to India on 25 July 1962 but maintained a silence on what had transpired at Geneva. He briefed the cabinet 6 days later. Meanwhile, on 25 July 1962, a future prime minister had written to Nehru saying that the frequent absence of the defense minister during a time when India faced a crisis on its borders with China in Ladakh was totally unjustifiable. That very day Nehru replied to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, then a member of the Rajya Sabha, saying that he saw nothing wrong in Krishna Menon going abroad for 5 days, particularly to attend the last stages of the Laos conference, in which we have been engaged and have played an important part. He assured Vajpayee that the Ladakh matter was now under the defense chiefs. 3 months later China would attack India, and India would suffer a humiliating defeat in the war. The price that Nehru had to pay to pacify his own party colleagues and to get immediate military assistance from the US, the UK, and Canada would be to accept Krishna Menon's resignation as defense minister. Excerpted with permission from Penguin Random House India. Put out the fire, the Indian Express. By Editorial, updated, December 9, 2019, 11 hours 50 minutes and 37 seconds p.m. The owners of the building had reportedly not applied for a no-objection certificate from the Fire Safety Department before converting their premises into manufacturing units. Occurred 5-story building in Anuj Mandi in the periphery of Delhi's walled city area bears testimony to one of the city's worst fire accidents since the Uphar tragedy of 1997. In the early hours of Sunday, a fire swept through the residential building that housed several manufacturing units, asphyxiating 43 workers, at least 5 of them minors. The 600-square-yard building is a typical example of a manufacturing units cluster, operating without permits, from cramped residential quarters. It had just one exit that could be used. The second exit was blocked by piles of goods, many of them combustible. This, and the fact that the 5 floors of the building had barely any ventilation, meant that the workers, most of them immigrants, had very little chance to escape. The owners of the building had reportedly not applied for a no-objection certificate from the fire safety department before converting their premises into manufacturing units. In fact, less than 24 hours before Sunday's blaze, the area had seen 2 other factory fires, which were doused before they could cause any harm. Union Urban Affairs Minister Hardeep Singh Puri has laid the blame on the doors of the Delhi Fire Safety (DFS) department. The DFS has thrown up its hands, claiming that it has little enforcement powers, which, it says, is the prerogative of the city's municipal authorities. Delhi is not new to such blame games. The last round happened in February, when a fire swept through a hotel in northwest Delhi, killing at least 17 people. But questions raised in the aftermath of such episodes have never moved municipal and fire safety authorities to take concerted action to plug the loopholes in the city's accident preparedness. This has meant that Part 4 of the National Building Code, which has detailed instructions on fire safety, and Delhi's own fire safety rules have remained, for the most part, dead letters. In the post-liberalization era, unregulated manufacturing units have mushroomed in several lower-middle-class residential areas, unauthorized colonies and slum clusters of the capital. Anuj Mandi is a good example of the liberalized economy's underbelly. Once a flourishing wholesale grain market, its traders have now moved to bigger markets. In the Mandi's serpentine lanes, units producing school bags, garments and toy factories and printing units exist cheek by jowl with residential quarters. These, as Sunday's accident shows, are tinderboxes. The Delhi municipality's standard response after such accidents has been to crack the whip on individual offenders. The government has, at times, tried to move some of these unregulated units to new industrial hubs such as Bawana and Narela. But by all accounts, these plans have not succeeded because the owners and workers of these factories found relocation uneconomical. Shouldn't the government, which swears by small-scale industry, attempt a more creative solution that enables safer working conditions without stifling entrepreneurship? Moment of Reckoning, The Indian Express. By Editorial, updated, December 9, 2019, 11 hours 53 minutes and 37 seconds p.m. Suu Kyi, who holds the formal designation of state counselor to the government, but is de facto civilian leader of Myanmar, possibly believes that her defending her country's actions against the Rohingya would carry credibility in the court. Aung San Suu Kyi's decision to appear before the International Court of Justice to defend Myanmar from charges of genocide against Rohingya Muslims is a gambit. It is based on her international stature built over 2 decades of being a prisoner of conscience, detained by the Myanmar junta, and the knowledge that defending her country can only bolster her nationalistic credentials at home and even strengthen her standing vis-a-vis the all-powerful military. No serving head of state has appeared before the ICJ. Suu Kyi, who holds the formal designation of state counselor to the government, but is de facto civilian leader of Myanmar, possibly believes that her defending her country's actions against the Rohingya would carry credibility in the court. Her decision to travel to The Hague has triggered an outpouring of support for her among Myanmar's majority Buddhist communities. Myanmar's anti-Rohingya actions, for which it is being pulled up before the International Court, enjoy much domestic support as the Rohingya are not considered indigenous to Myanmar, and do not have citizenship. It is ironic that Suu Kyi, who had only some years ago rallied international opinion against the army, will now appear in its support. She may have sensed that it might provide her a more equal footing with the country's most powerful institution, which is also the biggest obstacle to constitutional reform. It is ironic, too, that while the most powerful countries seemed powerless in the face of Myanmar's actions against the Rohingya community, it was a small country like Gambia, backed by the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, that has taken it to the ICJ on charges of violating the UN Convention of Prevention of Genocide. Gambia's lawsuit is based on a 2018 UN report that accused Myanmar of genocidal intent, and its army of murder, rape and a host of other charges. Suu Kyi's staunch refusal to take the side of the Rohingya has disappointed all those who saw her as an icon of freedom and democracy. Her defense in court is likely to be what it has been elsewhere, that military operations against the Rohingya in the Rakhine were actions against terrorism. The outflow of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar has impacted several of its neighbors, particularly Bangladesh, which now hosts the largest Rohingya refugee camp in the world, as well as Thailand and other countries in Southeast Asia, where thousands from the community have fled to escape persecution. In India, too, the presence of the Rohingya has added to the polarizing debate on the religion of refugees. This case at the ICJ is sure to have ramifications beyond the borders of Myanmar. Just Eat It, The Indian Express. By Editorial, updated, December 9, 2019, 11 hours 59 minutes and 47 seconds p.m. Performance artist David Datuna consumed the profound, if slightly putrefied fruit, at the Art Basel Festival in Miami, U.S. Here's the most charitable explanation of Italian artist Maurizio Cattelan's Comedian. The work of art is not one that requires great skill to produce, it is a banana duct taped to a wall. But it can be seen, perhaps, as a joke on the entire self-important and rarefied world of high art. At $1.20 or 85 rupees, 34,280, that's a pricey punchline. And, on Saturday, someone ate the punchline. Performance artist David Datuna consumed the profound, if slightly putrefied fruit, at the Art Basel Festival in Miami, U.S. He did so, he says, for the most fundamental of reasons, hunger. The now digested banana, of course, will be replaced and the publicity will only drive up the value of the comedian. What the consumption of the work has done, though, is settle the debate about the usefulness of art. As much as talent, creating something from nothing is about intelligence and context. In the sparse, sanitized, do-not-touch environment of the gallery and the museum, a simple perishable object certainly makes a statement, both about the ephemeral nature of the work and the pomposity of those who run such spaces. The price is part of the joke on that world, and if Cattelan can get rich off it, kudos to him. In fact, Comedian scores over most other contemporary works on one important score. It isn't useless, in the most basic sense. A banana is a nutritious fruit. In addition, it has great value in its symbolism, slipping on its peel is the most basic joke, and it is rife with social and political meaning, think Banana Republic. But, most important of all, Cattelan's joke should finally silence both the elite gatekeepers of high culture, and those on the other end of the spectrum, who believe that literal meaning is the only kind that matters. Instant reward, on Karnataka defection politics, The Hindu. Instant reward, not punishment, is what people willed for Karnataka lawmakers who defected from the Congress and the Janata Dal, secular, to the BJP and sought a fresh mandate in by-elections held on December 5. Their defection and subsequent resignation from the legislature led to the collapse of the Congress JD's coalition government in Karnataka, paving the way for the current Bharatiya Janata Party (BJP) government in July, led by B.S. Yediyurappa. With the BJP winning 12 of the 15 seats to which by-elections were held, the party now has 117 MLAs and a comfortable majority in the assembly. The party had fallen short of a majority in the 2018 election that threw up a hung legislature. The post-poll alliance of the JDS and the Congress was a legitimate move to end the impasse, but it was destined to be unstable. The JDS strength was less than half of the Congress strength, but its leader H.D. Kumaraswamy became the chief minister. The BJP, particularly Mr. Yediyurappa, turned the resentment in the Congress camp to his advantage. In a replay of similar sequence of events in the past, MLAs resigned, as if on cue. 16 of those MLAs were promptly admitted to the BJP, and 13 were fielded as its candidates. The chief minister hinted on Monday that at least 11 of the 12 winners would be given ministerial berths. The central leadership of the BJP had appeared to be keeping an arm's length from the developments in Karnataka at the beginning, but it was quick to own up to the victory on Monday, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself terming it as a popular rejection of the Congress. He accused the Congress of subverting the 2018 mandate. The BJP had 104 won seats in the 224-strong assembly in 2018, and its majority today has been won through a devious route. What rankles is the fact that there is now a Karnataka model of achieving a majority by engineering an adequate number of by-elections through highly questionable means. In the present instance, it is legitimized by the voters, but that is no reason to overlook the undermining of democratic processes. The BJP must be happy that its strategy succeeded, but it must also reflect on the cost to democracy this might entail. Now that it has a clear mandate, the BJP must focus on governance and walk the extra mile to reassure the public on its commitment to democratic behavior. The state's capital Bangalore is also a key center of Indian economy and political stability. There has a larger import for the country. The setback could trigger changes in the Congress also. Party chief Dinesh Gundu Rao and leader of opposition Siddaramaiah have resigned their respective posts. The party should reflect deeply on its character and strategy as an alternative to the BJP. Political opposition without a foundational ideological basis cannot be the answer. Doping to win, on Russia's ban from global sporting events, The Hindu. Monday's decision by the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, to ban Russia from global sporting events for a 4-year period is arguably the biggest sporting crisis the country has faced till date. The anti-doping watchdog's move will hurt Russia the most at the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games and the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, where the nation's flag, name and anthem will not be allowed. Russia will inevitably approach the Court of Arbitration for Sport with an appeal, for which it has 3 weeks, but if the sentence is upheld it could bar the nation from participation in several high-profile global sporting events, including the 2022 Football World Cup in Qatar. The saga has its roots in the scandal that erupted on the eve of the 2016 Rio Olympics, when whistleblower reports nailed Russia for running one of the most sophisticated doping programs. The allegations centered around the active collusion of Russian anti-doping experts, the sports ministry and members of the country's intelligence service in replacing dope-tainted urine samples with clean ones during the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. In September 2018, as part of the resolution of that case, Russia reluctantly agreed to open up its database to corroborate the findings of the reports. WADA has now ruled that the country manipulated this very database in order to cover up large-scale violations. However, as stiff as the latest sanctions seem, there is considerable doubt among anti-doping crusaders whether the measures go far enough. Even ahead of the Rio Games, WADA had recommended that Russia be expelled, but the International Olympic Committee, IOC, under President Thomas Bach, had left the decision to individual sports governing bodies, and, subsequently, athletes who were cleared of doping were allowed to compete as neutrals. A similar episode had played out during the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Games, where Russia was again banned but individual athletes competed. The IOC's hand may be forced this time around by the sheer magnitude of the findings, but there remains a similar possibility of Russian competitors still participating. It may be worth noting that despite Sochi, Russia still played host to marquee events such as the 2015 World Aquatics Championships and the 2018 FIFA World Cup, and is again slated to host the swimming event in 2025. In a sense, both the IOC and WADA have had to straddle the thin line between two powerful but opposing arguments, of punishing Russia, the country, for its misdemeanors while at the same time preserving natural justice for athletes who are clean. But, increasingly it feels like a situation where even honest sportspersons may end up paying the price for the machinations of their corrupt administrators. A patently unconstitutional piece of legislation, the Hindu. The Citizenship Amendment Bill, 2019 has a sinister political logic, the first de jure attempt towards a Hindu Rashtra. How a country defines who can become its citizens defines what that country is, because citizenship is really the right to have rights. For India, the choice was inexplicably made in 1950 when the constitution was adopted, and Part 2, concerning citizenship, provided citizenship based on domicile in the territory of India. In fact, under Article 6 of the Constitution, migrants from Pakistani territory to Indian territory were also given citizenship rights. Religion was conspicuous in this constitutional scheme, in its absence. The Constitution also recognizes the power of Parliament to make provisions with respect to acquisition and termination of citizenship. Pursuant to this, Parliament had enacted the Citizenship Act, 1955. Again, religion is not a relevant criteria under the 1955 Act. This position is now sought to be changed through the proposed Citizenship Amendment Bill, 2019 (CAB), that seeks to amend certain provisions of the 1955 Act. The obvious question on which much of the debate has so far focused on is whether in a country such as India, with a secular constitution, certain religious groups can be preferred in acquisition of citizenship. Especially when secularism has been declared to be a basic feature of the constitution in a multitude of judgments. But in addition to this basic question, a look at the proposed CAB shows that it is peppered with unconstitutionalities. The classification of countries and communities in the CAB is constitutionally suspect. Country classification. First to the countries. The basis of clubbing Afghanistan, Pakistan and Bangladesh together and thereby excluding other, neighboring, countries is unclear. A common history is not a ground, as Afghanistan was never a part of British India and always a separate country. Being a neighbor, geographically, is no ground too, as Afghanistan does not share an actual land border with India. More importantly, why have countries such as Nepal, Bhutan and Myanmar, which share a land border with India, been excluded? The reason stated in the Statement of Objects and Reasons of the bill is that these three countries constitutionally provide for a state religion, thus, the bill is to protect religious minorities in these theocratic states. This reason does not hold water. Why then is Bhutan, which is a neighbor and constitutionally a religious state, the official religion being Vajrayana Buddhism, excluded from the list? In fact, Christians in Bhutan can only pray privately inside their homes. Many Bhutanese Christians in the border areas travel to India to pray in a church. Yet they are not beneficiaries under CAB. Further, if religious persecution of religious minorities in the neighborhood is the concern, then why has Sri Lanka, which is Buddhist majority and has a history where Tamil Hindus have been persecuted, been excluded? Why is also Myanmar, which has conducted a genocide against Muslim Rohingyas, many of who have been forced to take refuge in India, not been included? The CAB selection of only these three countries is manifestly arbitrary. Focus on certain groups. On the classification of individuals, the bill provides benefits to sufferers of only one kind of persecution, i.e., religious persecution. This itself is a suspect category. Undoubtedly, the world abounds in religious persecution, but it abounds equally, if not more, in political persecution. If the intent is to protect victims of persecution, there is no logic to restrict it only to religious persecution. Further, the assumption that religious persecution does not operate against co-religionists is also false. Taslima Nasreen of Bangladesh is a case in point. She or similarly placed persons will not get the benefit of the proposed amendment, even though she may have personally faced more religious persecution than many Bangladeshi Hindus. Similarly, Shias in Pakistan, a different sect of the same religion, also face severe persecution in Pakistan. The fact that atheists are missing from the list of beneficiaries is shocking. Restricting the benefits of religious minority to 6 religious groups, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis and Christians, is equally questionable. Ahmadiyas in Pakistan are not recognized as Muslims there and are treated as belonging to a separate religion. In fact, because they are seen as a religion that has tried to change the meaning of Islam, they are more persecuted than even Christians or Hindus. If the avowed objective of CAB is to grant citizenship to migrants on the basis of religious persecution in their country of origin, the absence of Ahmadiyas from the list makes things clear. Article 14 of the Constitution of India prevents the state from denying any person, as opposed to citizen, equality before the law, or equal protection of the laws, within the territory of India. From the serious incongruities of CAB, as explained above, it is not difficult to imagine how it will not just deny equal protection of laws to similarly placed persons who come to India as illegal migrants, but in fact grants citizenship to the less deserving at the cost of the more deserving. How else does one explain how a Rohingya who has saved himself from harm in Myanmar by crossing into India will not be entitled to be considered for citizenship, while a Hindu from Bangladesh, who is primarily an economic migrant and who may not have faced any direct persecution in his life, will be entitled to be considered apparently on the ground of religious persecution? Similarly, why a Tamil from Jaffna who took a boat to escape the atrocities in Sri Lanka will continue be an illegal migrant, and never be entitled to apply for citizenship by naturalization. It is not difficult to imagine many other examples of this kind that reveal the manifestly arbitrary nature of CAB. There is also the reduction in the residential requirement for naturalization, from 11 years to 5. It is almost as if CAB in its provisions and impact is trying to give definitional illustrations of the word arbitrary. CAB is devoid of any constitutional logic, as explained above. But it does have a sinister political logic. By prioritizing Hindus in matters of citizenship as per law, it seeks to make India a Hindu homeland, and is the first de jure attempt to make India a Hindu Rashtra. If India is to stay a country for Indians and not for Hindu Afghans, Hindu Pakistanis and Hindu Bangladeshis, and eventually for Hindu Russians, Hindu Americans, CAB should not be passed in Parliament. If it is, the judiciary must call it out for what it is, a patently unconstitutional piece of legislation. Else, make no mistake, it is only the beginning and not the end of similar legal moves, which, with time, will bring an end to the Constitution as we know it. Shadan Farasad is an advocate practicing in the Supreme Court of India. The views expressed are personal, wholly subordinated to the majoritarian nation, the Hindu. The NRC CAB Combine seeks the reconstitution of Indian nationhood on the lines of V.D. Savarkar's idea. With India for their basis of operation, for their fatherland and for their holy land, bound together by ties of a common blood and common culture, Hindus can dictate their terms to the whole world. These words scratched by V.D. Savarkar on the walls of a prison, and published in 1923 as a book that defined Hindutva, are roughly 100 years old. Political boundaries are artificial and imagined barriers to human movement. Most violence in the modern history of humankind emanated from attempts to enforce boundaries that purportedly protect citizens and eject aliens. The Holocaust and the Palestinian dispossession are two egregious examples. Ascribing and claiming legitimacy for a particular community territory link is a political project, and Savarkar did this with remarkable clarity. During the Second World War, he exhorted Hindus to join the British Army, not to fight fascism, but to prepare for the civil war with Muslims that he thought was inevitable. Muslims and Christians could never be loyal citizens, he argued. He wrote, the tie of a common holy land has at times proven stronger than the claims of a motherland. Look at the Mohammedans. Mecca to them is a sterner reality than Delhi or Agra. The idea that nation is not territorial, but cultural, was the core of Savarkar's treatise. Though the notion of a holy land is emphasized, it is only a basis of operation to dictate terms to the rest of the world. Not all those who are residents are a part of the nation, and not all outside the territory are outside the nation. India's founding fathers and public opinion overwhelmingly rejected this notion at the time of independence, but an Islamic mirror image of it was born into reality as Pakistan. Rooted and true. Though a group of sedate political experts were hallucinating a delink between Narendra Modi and Hindutva in 2014, he was clear in his promises and has been true to them in government. The non-territorial notion of citizenship and nationhood, the core of Hindutva, was reiterated in the 2014 manifesto of the Bharatiya Janata Party, foretelling the amendment to the Citizenship Act, which was passed by the Lok Sabha on December 9. India shall remain a natural home for persecuted Hindus and they shall be welcome to seek refuge here, the manifesto said. The NRIs, non-resident Indians, PIOs, person of Indian origin, and professionals settled abroad are a vast reservoir to articulate the national interests and affairs globally. This resource will be harnessed for strengthening brand India, the manifesto foretold Mr. Modi's diaspora politics. Talking to the Indian diaspora in London on November 13, 2015, Mr. Modi said, "Our relations are based on the ties of our blood, not on the color of our passports. All the rights of Narendra Modi has, you do too." While the Citizenship Amendment Bill 2019 (CAB) seeks to enact as law the notion of India as the home for all Hindus anywhere, the National Register of Citizens (NRC) seeks to weed out those who are already in the territory but are not part of the nation, as per Savarkar's doctrine, echoed in numerous resolutions and statements of the BJP and its forebear, the Jan Sangh. For a non-Muslim excluded from the NRC, there could be a route to citizenship once CAB is law. This distinction between infiltrators and refugees that Home Minister Amit Shah made during the debate on CAB in the Lok Sabha was made by Mr. Modi during the 2014 campaign. As Mr. Shah told Parliament, nobody can complain of being blindsided by the government on CAB. It was part of the BJP's agenda on which it sought a mandate in 2014 and 2019. The outlines. If Muslims were not legitimate citizens of the nation, where would they go? While he would not accept them as part of the Hindu nation, Savarkar would also not concede to the demand for a separate country for them, and he fiercely opposed the demand for Pakistan. It was left to M.S. Golwalkar of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, with whom Savarkar had a hostile relationship, to spell out clearly what non-Hindus were supposed to do. They may stay in the country, wholly subordinated to the Hindu nation, claiming nothing, deserving no privileges, far less any preferential treatment, not even citizens' rights. When India debates what happens to those who will not be able to prove their citizenship under the NRC, and are unable to seek citizenship under CAB, this is the future envisaged for them in the Hindutva notion. This understanding of nationhood and citizenship is reflected in the government's move to end the special constitutional status of Jammu and Kashmir, and demote and divide the region into two union territories. Kashmiris, far from aspiring for autonomy and enjoying special protection of their cultural identity, are now reduced to seeking the restoration of basic citizenship rights and statehood, as and when they are allowed to speak, that is. Far from holding a veto on Indian politics as the BJP had accused them of for decades, Muslims would be seeking to restore their voting rights, if unable to meet the onerous requirement to be listed in the NRC. The shallowness and duplicity of the government's claim that the scrapping of the special status of J&K was about uncompromising uniformity of laws across the country stands exposed in CAB, that continues to provide special protection to the cultural rights of several communities. Mr. Shah also made the reassurance during the debate that Article 371, which protects the cultural integrity of many regions, would never be altered. So, it is not a matter of principle for the government that no community shall be granted special cultural rights, it is only that Muslims will not be allowed that. The U.S. in a parallel. The ongoing attempts in India to remake itself have striking parallels in the political project of U.S. President Donald Trump. In January 2017, soon after taking over, Mr. Trump ordered a religious test for admission to the U.S. Through an executive order, he banned travelers from 7 Muslim-majority countries from entry. The order also had a provision, echoing the Modi government's CAB, which was then pending in Parliament. The president ordered to prioritize refugee claims made by individuals on the basis of religious-based persecution, provided that the religion of the individual is a minority religion in the individual's country of nationality. This would have excluded Muslims from Muslim-majority countries, the exact intent of the CAB. The American judiciary stalled the implementation of the order, and a third version of the travel ban that was finally upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court in June 2018 did not have the above provision. 2 non-Muslim countries were included in the amended list of countries from where travelers are banned. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the principle that there cannot be a bar on entry based on religious categories, though it allowed the third iteration of the presidential order to stand. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, speaking for the minority in the 5-4 judgment, said the presidential order, even the revised one, was discriminatory and unconstitutional. She held that a reasonable observer would view the executive action as motivated by animus against Muslims, and termed the majority decision as a repetition of the past mistake of upholding the Japanese-American internment camps in 1944. During the Second World War, when Savarkar was recruiting future soldiers to deal with the internal enemies, Franklin D. Roosevelt, hailed as a progressive president, was ordering the internment of thousands of American citizens of Japanese origin. That past appears to be returning, not as a haunting nightmare as it should be, but heralded as the promised glorious future. What makes Hindu majoritarianism more effective is its doctrinaire legacy, supported by texts and enforced by a quasi-military cadre. Varghese.g@thehindu.co.in. Now you see Russia, the Indian Express. By Editorial, updated, December 10, 2019, 11 hours 22 minutes and 42 seconds p.m. Like babushka dolls, Russia is stuck with the reputation of compulsive doping ever since the days of Cold War intrigue, and the 2020 ban is considered the denouement. Sports equivalents of 07s, the righteous athletes from the UK and US, must have celebrated, oh so briefly, the banning of their favorite whipping boys, the Russians. Such has been the frenzied outrage at the dope taint on the sporting superpower of the erstwhile Eastern Bloc that world anti-doping agencies ruling to purge the 2020 FIFA World Cup and Olympics of Russian presence started a small hurrah across Twitter, only for the fine print to collapse the Mexican wave of cheer before it crossed the Atlantic, and it became apparent that the Russians could fetch up anyway if they could prove they were clean to their federations. Which ought to have been exactly what happened at all previous Olympic editions, but WADA can't quite be sure. That, in a nutshell, means that the Olympics, World Cup and other events might not have Russia, but they certainly will have Russians. WADA, with the ever-generous and hospitable Americans, managed to whisk away a whistleblower and get the lid off the Russian doping program 5 years ago. But the Russians brazenly tampered readings in computer files, muddying waters. For the sake of fairness, WADA has allowed the clean, Russian athletes to compete. So, expect the glorious Olgas, Marias, Alexis, Antons, Tatianas, Yulias and Alexanders to match the 56 medals that athletes from the country that must not be named, CTMNBN, won last time. And don't be surprised if Vova Putin keeps count of those CTMNBN medals and chuckles away, cackling about the unfairness of the West with a wink. Like babushka dolls, Russia is stuck with the reputation of compulsive doping ever since the days of Cold War intrigue, and the 2020 ban is considered the denouement, though it feels like a token rap on mittened knuckles. For the Russians who'll be there in Tokyo, but not quite, it's slipping into yet another script, this time Roald Dahl channeling Ian Fleming in You Only Live Twice. For all the latest opinion news, download Indian Express app. Tags. Russia. 0 comments *. Helsinki's different, the Indian Express. By Editorial, updated, December 10, 2019, 11 hours 26 minutes and 57 seconds p.m. Marin is the world's youngest prime minister at 34, which is 5 years younger than New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, who earned global admiration for her handling of hate crime. The dreariness of the global political landscape, dominated by aging, distinguished gentlemen who are not distinguishably gentle in their ways, is alleviated by the election of Social Democrat Sanna Marin as Prime Minister of Finland. She will head a 5-party coalition government in which 12 out of 18 cabinet berths are expected to go to women, leaving little elbow room for men with long heads and deep purposes. A coalition with a distributed power structure is also a refreshing reminder to electorates which have become recklessly appreciative of strong men who command the allegiance of overwhelming majorities that all the people are not comfortable with absolute power all the time. Marin is the world's youngest prime minister at 34, which is 5 years younger than New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, who earned global admiration for her handling of hate crime. In a depressing contrast, about 1,000 miles from Helsinki, in London, another prime minister will be elected this week. He will be a man of either 70 or 55 winters, depending on whether Labour or the Conservatives prevail. Also, Marin is the first person in her family with a university education. She represents the demographic dividend, which is endlessly talked up, but generally does not get sufficient opportunity, or the education to do justice to it. She is also the child of same-sex parents in what she has described as a rainbow family. In the world's biggest democracies, such a candidate would have sunk without a trace, leaving not a political ripple behind. She would have ticked all the wrong boxes and raised a tsunami of prejudice. Coalitions in which a single party does not wield near absolute power are often derided for being unable to just get the job done, since they have to accommodate the priorities of their constituent partners. It is not fully appreciated that a coalition, by diluting power, also offers built-in checks and balances, one of the fundamental mechanisms of democracy, which prevents a single party from amplifying majoritarian prejudices. Also, while it cannot be assumed that power wielded by women is intrinsically less dangerous than power in the hands of men, a government in which women are numerically superior does harbor the possibilities of new priorities and will perhaps innovate processes. A dimming confidence, The Indian Express. By Editorial, updated, December 10, 2019, 11 hours 31 minutes and 41 seconds p.m. For some time now, there has seemingly been a growing disconnect between the stock indices and the broader economy. While economic growth has fallen precipitously, the Sensex has scaled new heights. The sharp fall in inflows into equity mutual funds signals a shift of mood within the investor community in India. These inflows plummeted to 1,312 crore rupees in November, the lowest levels since June 2016, according to latest data from the Association of Mutual Funds in India, AMFI. That this fall has taken place despite the Sensex hitting a record high, and foreign investors pumping around 20,000 crore rupees into the stock market during this period, seems to reinforce the view that sentiment in India has been badly hit. It suggests that investors are voting with their feet, and is in line with the findings of the Reserve Bank of India's RBI Consumer Confidence Survey, which reveals that sentiment on the general economic situation and the employment scenario in the country weakened further in November. For some time now, there has seemingly been a growing disconnect between the stock indices and the broader economy. While economic growth has fallen precipitously, the Sensex has scaled new heights. But a closer look at the market suggests that the rally was largely driven by a few stocks, reflecting the fact that investors were shifting to high-quality stocks at any price. In fact, while returns in the large-cap category have been around 12% over the past year, they were much lower for the small and mid-caps, reflecting the pain in the larger economy. The fall in inflows in November could be indicative of a reassessment by market participants of the growth trajectory. India's economic growth has fallen from 8% in the first quarter of 2018-19 to 4.5% in the second quarter of 2019-20. The fall in nominal growth to 6.1% is particularly disconcerting, as it would mean lower sales and profit growth for companies. With growth prospects likely to remain uncertain for the foreseeable future, cuts in earnings per share are likely to continue, further depressing sentiment. The only silver lining in the data seems to be that inflows, channeled through systematic investment plans, SIPs, remained stable, rising marginally to 8,272 crore rupees, up by 27 crore rupees last month, with the total number of SIP accounts increasing to 2.94 crore. Yet, if concerns over the country's growth prospects deepen further, these inflows are unlikely to hold up. Markets are forward-looking. And with the Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, deciding against cutting rates further, they will now be eyeing the upcoming union budget in February for measures to shore up the economy. The finance minister cannot afford to ignore the great expectations. A comprehensive reform package is needed to revive both business and consumer confidence. If Parliament passes the Citizenship Amendment Bill, India's constitutional structure, as we know it, will lose its soul. The Indian Express. Written by Harsh Mander, updated, December 11, 2019, 10 hours 45 minutes and 12 seconds am. This bill weighs upon tangled constellations of belonging and rights. Who belongs to India, and on what terms? And indeed, who does India belong to? Illustration, C.R. Sasikumar. Despite being under constant siege, the edifice of India's constitution has endured so far. The onslaught has intensified since the expanded mandate to the Narendra Modi government in May. However, if Parliament passes the Citizenship Amendment Bill, India's constitutional structure will cave in. Make no mistake, the constitution will not need to be rewritten. But its soul will be annihilated. A new nation will emerge from its rubble, wrathful, muscular, majoritarian, and inhospitable to its minorities. This bill weighs upon tangled constellations of belonging and rights. Who belongs to India, and on what terms? And indeed, who does India belong to? A young Bengali origin Assamese poet Qazi Neil lamented, "This land is mine. But I am not of this land." He loves India, but India refuses to own him. Also read, "Will declare myself Muslim if CAB gets parliament nod," activist Harsh Mander. Citizenship ultimately is the right to have rights. Who in this country should have rights, and from whom should these be withheld? The answer to these fraught questions were settled within the humanist and inclusive framework of the Indian Constitution. Its iridescent central premise was that religious faith has no bearing on eligibility for Indian citizenship. India belongs equally to its Muslim, Christian and Parsi residents, as much as to its Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists and Jains. Questions of belonging, and religion as politics, have torn India apart. The Muslim League regarded religion as the key to citizenship, therefore, India was not one but two nations, Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan. V.D. Savarkar concurred. India's Constituent Assembly steadfastly rejected this idea that India belonged only to its Hindu majority. Jawaharlal Nehru declared, "We accept as Indian anyone who calls himself a citizen of India." Opinion, Ram Madhav writes, Citizenship Amendment Bill continues long tradition of welcoming persecuted minorities. By introducing the Citizenship Amendment Bill (CAB), the BJP-led government has deliberately reopened old wounds, reviving old fears, anxieties and hatred of partition. This bill, in effect, endorses the two-nation theory by creating a hierarchy of citizenship based on religious faith, excluding Muslims from this hierarchy. The moral fig leaf offered is that this intends to provide refuge to people suffering religious persecution in neighboring countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan. If religious persecution was truly to become the yardstick for eligibility for Indian citizenship, then few neighbors are more tormented than the Ahmadiyas in Pakistan who face even death for worshipping in a mosque, the Rohingyas battling genocide in Myanmar, and the Uyghurs held in internment camps in China. Until 1987, to be eligible for Indian citizenship, it was sufficient for a person to be born in India. Then, spurred by the populist movements alleging massive illegal migrations from Bangladesh, citizenship laws were first amended to additionally require that at least one parent should be Indian. In 2004, the law was further amended to prescribe that not just one parent be Indian, but the other should not be an illegal immigrant. Opinion, Faizan Mustafa writes, religious basis of citizenship would be a negation of secularism, liberalism, equality and justice. The unease of the BJP-led governments of India and Assam with the NRC is that a much larger number of Bengali-origin Hindus have been excluded from it than Muslims. If they are judged as illegal immigrants, not just they, but their offsprings would become illegal because of the 2004 amendment. The CAB alone can rescue the BJP from this political conundrum. It will treat Bengali Hindus as refugees, and only the Bengali origin Muslims and all their later generations would become illegal, even if they were born in India and know no other country as their home. Treating Bengali origin Hindus, excluded from the Assam NRC, as persecuted refugees from Bangladesh, however, will require multiple extraordinary leaps of official faith. Not one of these persons would have claimed in any official forum, the NRC offices, foreigners' tribunals or police stations, that they are illegal Bangladeshi immigrants. They would have strenuously tried to establish exactly the opposite. But after the CAB, to secure Indian citizenship, they would have to claim to be foreigners to become eligible for Indian citizenship. There will also be questions of evidence. How will they prove that they were citizens of neighboring countries and that they were persecuted? The truth is that most had not crossed any border, but were unable to produce documents which satisfied officials that they were Indian citizens. The cab is the harbinger of a national NRC. By passing the cab, effectively, the government is clearly messaging that if people of any identity except Muslims are unable to produce the required documents, they will be accepted as refugees and given citizenship. This means that the real burden to prove that they are Indian citizens of the national NRC after cab is only thrust on Muslims, because only they will risk statelessness. Most Indians would find it impossible to muster the required documents to prove their citizenship, but only document-less Muslims will face the prospect of detention centers, or being stripped of all citizenship rights. And then, since this imagination of citizenship is all vested in documents, which documents will prove my religion? At present, it is only one's own declaration during the decadal census which is the official evidence of one's religious persuasion. I can be born into a religion, and can reject it when I am an adult. I can be born to parents who claim no religion. But if religion becomes the principal fulcrum of whether or not one is a citizen, then which document will the state rely upon to decide if I am a refugee or should be thrown into a detention center? For a republic built on guarantees of equality and non-discrimination on the basis of religion, creating a class of potentially stateless persons exclusively because of their religious identity would mark decisively the demise of India as a secular republic. The responsibility for this catastrophic collapse of the edifice of our Constitution would be shared by a political opposition emptied out of its moral and political convictions. The CAB NRC poses the gravest threat to India's secular democratic constitution since India became a republic, and must be fought with a nationwide civil disobedience movement. The contours of this struggle need to be worked out by we the people. But, I have decided on my form of civil disobedience. If the CAB is passed, I will, in solidarity with those whose citizenship alone will be contested, first declare myself to be Muslim. When the national NRC is organized, I will boycott it, and refuse to produce any documents. I will then demand that I be given the same punishment to which my undocumented Muslim sisters and brothers will be subjected, be it detention or the extinguishing of my citizenship rights. Citizenship Amendment Bill continues long tradition of welcoming persecuted minorities, The Indian Express. Written by Ram Madhav, updated, December 11, 2019 10 hours 32 minutes and 39 seconds am. Union Home Minister Amit Shah speaks in Lok Sabha on Monday after tabling the Citizenship Amendment Bill, 2019. First things first. The Citizenship Amendment Bill, CAB, is not about excluding anybody, it is about including some. It is an effort to grant citizenship to those minorities from erstwhile Pakistan, that now includes Pakistan and Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, who have come to India seeking refuge from religious persecution or the fear of it. The first time such refugees were included was immediately after partition in the first census, which was also regarded as the National Register of Citizens. Let's remember that every time such refugees come to India and claim citizenship, the government has been issuing citizenship to them after the due process. There are a number of instances of religious minorities from these three countries coming over to India on religious visas and deciding to stay back because of the dangerous situations that existed back home. They include Sikhs from Afghanistan, Sindhis and SCs from Pakistan, and Bengalis and tribals from Bangladesh. What the government intends to do through the proposed CAB is simplify the process of granting of citizenship to these minorities. Earlier, there was a 12-year wait under the regular citizenship laws. The new bill reduces that period to 5 years. A minority citizen from these three countries, who turns to India seeking citizenship, will become eligible for the same provided he or she has entered India before December 31, 2014 and has lived here for at least 5 years. Opinion. Harsh Mander writes, if Parliament passes the Citizenship Amendment Bill, India's constitutional structure, as we know it, will lose its soul. Unfortunately, the debate on the bill has been distorted by the opposition, citing erroneous arguments like the violation of Article 14 and the principle of secularism. Granting citizenship to sections of the population is a regular process. During the Liberation War of Bangladesh, lakhs of Hindus and other minorities had poured into India. This migration was no smaller than at the time of partition. A majority of them had come to states like Bengal, Assam and Tripura. Camps were created for such migrants and special efforts were made to provide citizenship to them by the government at the time. There are a good number of such Bangladeshi immigrants in these three states who had secured citizenship documents at that time. Nobody called it a violation of Article 14. Similar facilities were extended to persecuted Indians from Uganda during Idi Amin's rule, and then, too, nobody had demanded that in order to be secular we should extend citizenship to Ugandans. Home Minister Amit Shah's invoking of partition has an important historical bearing on the issue. We can't shut our eyes to the fact that India was partitioned on religious lines and large-scale communal violence erupted as a result. Between 1947 and 1950, millions crossed over to either side. They all became citizens of the respective countries. But then, it came to the knowledge of the authorities that even after 1950, the migration was continuing into the northeast for reasons that were not necessarily partition-related. It was then that the Jawaharlal Nehru government promulgated the Immigrants' Expulsion from Assam Act, 1950. The act stated that the government would deport those immigrants who had entered Assam illegally and whose presence was considered detrimental to the interests of Assam and India. When the question of minorities was brought to Nehru's attention, he exempted all of them from the 1950 Act. Opinion: Faizan Mustafa writes, religious basis of citizenship would be a negation of secularism, liberalism, equality and justice. The relevant portion of the 1950 Act states, provided that nothing in this section shall apply to any person who on account of civil disturbances or the fear of such disturbances in any area now forming part of Pakistan has been displaced from or has left his place of residence in such area and who has been subsequently residing in Assam. Nehru was categorical that the Act wouldn't apply to minority immigrants like Hindus, Buddhists, Christians and Sikhs. The proposed bill is a continuation of that unfinished agenda. It has become necessary that the issue of the illegal immigrants be addressed in one go, as their numbers have swelled to millions in the last several decades. This bill will come as a big boon to all those hapless people who have been the victims of partition and the subsequent conversion of the three countries into theocratic Islamic republics. Arguing that the bill is anti-secular is specious. After independence, not once but twice, we conceded that the minorities in our neighborhood were our responsibility. First, immediately after partition and again during the Indira-Mujib Pact in 1972 when India had agreed to absorb over 1.2 million refugees. It is a historical fact that on both the occasions, it was only the Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists and Christians who had come over to our side. Far from being anti-secular, Indian citizenship was a commitment given by our leaders to the minorities. That is precisely what the Narendra Modi government is fulfilling now. India has several other refugees that include Tamils from Sri Lanka and Hindu Rohingya from Myanmar. They are not covered under this act. Similarly, the Nepalese and others from neighboring countries are guided either by bilateral agreements or the citizenship laws of our country. Concerns of some sections in the Northeast have also been adequately addressed by excluding Schedule 6 areas and the inner line permit restricted areas from the purview of the bill. The CAB is a law applicable to the entire country. The government will make sure that no state shall face any adverse impact on its demography, culture, language and customs. In its 2 millennia-long history, India has always welcomed persecuted minorities, like the Parsis, Jews and others, from wherever they came. The CAB is a continuation of that national tradition. Religious basis of citizenship would be a negation of secularism, liberalism, equality and justice. The Indian Express. Written by Faizan Mustafa, updated, December 11, 2019 10 hours 41 minutes and 5 seconds am. The Citizenship Amendment Bill is unnecessary. The year was 2013. I was traveling in China, when a taxi driver there posed a question to me, why are there so few Buddhists in India? The fact is we did persecute Buddhists in India. Religious persecution has always been there and all religions are guilty of it. The Narendra Modi government is, therefore, right in recognizing religious persecution. But the solution it presents to the problem is not only unconstitutional but dangerous. It will surely damage India's standing in the comity of nations. The Citizenship Amendment Bill, CAB, is more in tune with the Israeli law of return that treats Israel as the natural home of all Jews. Ideally, we should say anyone persecuted anywhere in the world, on the ground of religion or political opinion, would be welcome in India. Shared identity is at the core of citizenship. The framers of our Constitution and those who enacted the Citizenship Act in 1955 believed in citizenship as a unifying idea. Today, citizenship is being used to divide people and treat people of certain religious persuasion as inferior. The majoritarian politics is divisive as it distinguishes Indic faiths from those that originated outside India and says the latter cannot have any sacred places of worship in India. Now, through the CAB, we are creating divisions between Abrahamic religions by including Christians in the bill but excluding Jews and Muslims. The bill also ignores atheists. Opinion, Ram Madhav writes, Citizenship Amendment Bill continues long tradition of welcoming persecuted minorities. Articles 5 to 11 of the Constitution give details of various categories of persons who are entitled to citizenship. Article 11 empowers Parliament to regulate citizenship, and the Citizenship Act was passed in 1955. This does not mean that Parliament, through an ordinary law, can destroy the fundamental values or the basic structure of the Constitution. The religious basis of citizenship would be a negation not only of secularism but also of liberalism, equality and justice. Interestingly, neither the Constitution nor